The Chicago Bears make a big splash and hire Ben Johnson, a home run hire for the Bears, who typically strike out. That and more on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready. Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today as I am every Tuesday by Locked On NFL expert Lauren Cox. On today's episode, we're going to look at what's next for the four teams that lost in the divisional round, including the Baltimore Ravens, and Lamar Jackson deserves more blame. But we're going to start with the big news. The Chicago Bears have hired their next head coach, and it's the top name on the market, Ben Johnson, the former offensive coordinator from the Detroit Lions. We got the perfect person in the chair to break it down. Before we get into it, though, do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, like I said, the best person we could possibly have on the show for this news, our Locked On Bears expert, Lauren Cox. Lauren, I would be even madder than I already am if I didn't just ask you, what are your thoughts on the move?
Expected the Bears to actually be able to land the top candidate, right? Like Bears fans hope, hey, can we get the guy that everybody wants? But most of the time in Bears hiring cycles, they end up with kind of like a choice of like, okay, like a second and third choice kind of guy where it's like, okay, there's something to like about him, but we're a little skeptical, but okay, sure, maybe we can get excited about this. But like this hiring eliminates the possibility for like hindsight in the future. We're never going to look back and say, oh, the Bears should have hired somebody else or should have known that this other coach would be a better candidate because they got the guy everybody else wanted.
Yeah, I think no matter what, the most secure thing for Bears fans is this was good process. And I think when you look at things don't always work out. The Baltimore Ravens have good process. The Buffalo Bills have good process. We're going to talk about them in just a second. Like, that doesn't mean that you're going to win and you're going to win the Super Bowl and you can have the best process ever. It doesn't mean it's going to work out, but all you can control is that process. So for the Chicago Bears to go through the interview process like they could, identify the top candidate and actually get that candidate to come try to help their young quarterback, that's massive. And I think for me, that's the big thing moving forward is Bears fans don't have to do that hindsight of, oh, we could have done better. Whether this works out or not, we can't know. But this was the right move for the Chicago Bears to make, whether it works out or not. And now the question is, how does this benefit Caleb Williams? So what are you hoping to see from Ben Johnson with Caleb Williams?
Yeah, I mean, the bar is kind of the floor for Ben Johnson coming in, so it's good for him because, I mean, Caleb Williams has already had two different play callers throughout his Bears career so far and has had to already kind of adjust to some stuff, and like Shane Waldron wasn't giving him a ton of instruction and a ton of structure, and that's really, I think, where it starts. It's like, okay, Caleb is a great playmaker who, when stuff breaks down, he can make magic happen, but you got to give him some stuff to break down first, right? And there just wasn't enough like, hey, this is how many stop drops on your step back you're supposed to go. Here's your progression. Like, here's how it's supposed to go. Like, just give him a little bit more guidance here and then let him be great within the structure and then be great outside of the structure. We know Ben Johnson in Detroit, a lot of running the football, a lot of play action, some deep shots off of that. Like, I think it's just going to really give Caleb so much more of a jumping off point to really develop into the quarterback the Bears believe he can be.
Yeah, it's funny you say that the bar is the floor, and that's like the total opposite of the ceiling is the roof from Michael Jordan. But I agree with you there that, well, Caleb Williams is so good when the play breaks down that it's like the Bears tried to make that their offense. Like, it's breaking down. I think you're right that the way you want to use the playmaking ability from Caleb Williams is break in case of emergency. That the best quarterbacks in the NFL, that's the way they use that playmaking ability is, hey, I'm going to win from the pocket. I want to win with what's there. I want to take what the defense gives me, win within structure. And when all else fails, I have this ace in my back pocket that I can go to. And that's where Caleb Williams is going to be at his best. So I think having a coordinator in Ben Johnson who just played with a quarterback that doesn't have that playmaking and that mobility is even better news for Caleb Williams, because the only thing that Ben Johnson has known for the last few years is operating an offense without having that get out of jail free card from a coaching standpoint. So if he could construct the offense and teach the offense like he's got Jared Goff, and then Caleb Williams, just when he absolutely has to, can break out that magic that he showed. People can look at Jayden Daniels and be down on Caleb Williams, but Caleb Williams showed some incredible flashes in his rookie year underneath all of the Bears toxicity in general. You know what I mean? So I'm really fired up for this hire for the Bears.
Yeah, I think you hit at one of the major lingering questions here, though, with Ben Johnson. The offense for Jared Goff and the offense for Caleb Williams probably need to be a little different, right? Goff is much more of a precision, quick passing underneath type of quarterback, and Caleb has never been like that style of like get rid of the ball in 2 seconds like Tua Tagovailoa, right? Like he's much more of a holds it a little bit longer but wants to let the bigger play develop, and that's not necessarily the offense Caleb Williams had in Detroit, or that Ben Johnson had in Detroit. So it's a question of, does Ben Johnson try and make Caleb Williams into that type of quarterback more, or does Ben Johnson change his offense to fit more of Caleb Williams? And either one of those is a little bit of an unknown. It's not a perfect match to what we saw in Detroit.
Well, what do you think the balance should be? Should Caleb Williams come more towards Ben Johnson? Should Ben Johnson go more towards Caleb Williams? Should it be a perfect, even 50-50 give and take from both of them? What do you think is best?
Generally, I tend to feel like the best coaches do what their players are best at. The coach adapts to the players. Like obviously Caleb Williams needs to get better at, being more accurate. And some of those, you need to have quick timing sometimes. Like, of course he needs to grow in those areas, but you don't want to try and take a quarterback that has special traits and then make him into something else. You want to accentuate what he's already strong at, and then also try and make his weaknesses better, but minimize those at the same time.
100%. You're right about that. And I'm sure that's what Ben Johnson was selling in the interview. I will say this is somewhat of a surprise. I think a lot of people had Ben Johnson going to the Raiders, wasn't quite certain what the Bears were going to do. So this is a bit of surprise. We're hearing now after the hire that this might have been a bit of a surprise around the league as well. That's a great surprise for the Chicago Bears, though. I think overall, Lauren, I know you're in the trenches. It may seem homerish for you to say it. I have no ties to the Chicago Bears. This is a great hire for that team. We're hearing that Dennis Allen, the former Saints head coach, is set to be probably the defensive coordinator. Just real quick, happy with that move as well?
Yeah, he's reported as the leading candidate right now. But yes, I think I really like that Dennis Allen gets creative as a defensive coordinator. Like, he plays a lot of man coverage, but like likes to mix up coverages in the back end, gets more aggressive on the fronts. And I think he's the right mix of like a coach where he's not going to be this hot defensive coordinator candidate that's going to get hired right away to become a head coach again. Like he can linger for a couple of years and coach really well here. And maybe a few more years down the line, if he does great in Chicago, he could get hired away again, but he'll be here for a little while.
Yeah, it definitely has the feeling of a Brian Flores, Vic Fangio, Dan Quinn type situation where, look, some guys just aren't head coaches. They're just coordinators. You know what I mean? That's just the reality with some of these guys. But with that being said, we're going to continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. Big breaking news for the Chicago Bears. Now we got to talk about what comes next for the 4 teams that lost in the divisional round. It's Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. I love going to live events, whether it be sports, music, theater, comedy. One of my favorite memories was attending a concert last year. The energy, the excitement, it was unforgettable, and it was unforgettable because I got my tickets on Game Time. Now Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I was looking for tickets recently to an upcoming game, and I was using the Game Time app, and I just love the Game Time Picks because I found an amazing deal, and I could even get a view from my seat. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows you the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. What time is it? It's game time. Lauren, I'm just going to come out and say it. I know you go all the way back to week 1 when we broke down this game and talked about the first game of the season. I said, hey, Lamar Jackson had a good game, but he had 2 bad throws at the end of the game, and that's ultimately why his team lost. He wasn't good enough. And I said it in week 1, show me something in the playoffs. And Lamar Jackson did exactly what Lamar Jackson always does in the playoffs and not play his best football. We can talk about Mark Andrews dropping the ball, some mistakes by Derrick Henry. You can go to coaching, which we'll talk about in a second. But at the end of the day, Lamar Jackson does not play his best version of himself in the playoffs. And you look at the stats here. Lamar Jackson, his career in the playoffs, 12 total touchdowns, 11 turnovers. Josh Allen, 30 total touchdowns, 6 turnovers. Pat Mahomes, 47 total TDs, 9 turnovers. Lamar Jackson always gets put in the conversation with Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, and there seems to be some debate about who the second best quarterback in the league is. I am here to say that there is no more debate anymore. And again, you can blame Mark Andrews all you want for dropping the pass and then the fumble, but the reason that Baltimore wasn't able to stay close is because they got blown out in the first half because Lamar Jackson had 2 terrible turnovers. So I'm just sick of everybody else getting the blame, and we never want to just talk about the truth, and it's Lamar Jackson consistently chokes and plays his worst football in the playoffs, and that is indisputable.
Normally, I'd be the kind of guy who comes on here and says, well, listen, like, Lamar, he still played a pretty good game overall. Like he got the offense in position time and time again. Like, and I would be the one coming here saying, yeah, but this and Lamar did that, and it's more than just the quarterback here. But I think it gets to a point where the truly special quarterbacks do find a way to do even more. Like I think Lamar isn't the sole reason they lost. It's not necessarily like purely his fault, but like the Patrick Mahomeses of the world, they find a way that even when their tight end is going to drop a pass, or even when other players are making mistakes, they elevate so far above that they can overcome any of those obstacles. And Lamar gets pretty far and plays pretty well, but not that next level to really be in that upper echelon.
We are talking about one of the best quarterbacks in the entire NFL. Like, make no mistake about it. We're talking about the difference between the second best and the third best. To me, this is like in the NBA when you have all these players like LeBron and Jordan. Just my general philosophy on things is championships is what separate the greats. Once you get to a certain level, winning is what separates you. Both guys have a great arm. Both guys had all pros. Both guys have MVPs. When you start talking about the separation between the greatest of the greats, the separator will always be winning. And quite frankly, Lamar Jackson hasn't done enough of that. And again, I point to, he plays his best football in the regular season, not the postseason. And that's a big difference maker here. But the question is, what comes next for the Baltimore Ravens? And the thing is, I don't know where else they go from here except maybe a change at head coach. And my guy, Kevin Ostreicher from Locked On Ravens, talked about that possibility.
You can clip this if you want to, and you can come back to it in a year. Hopefully more than a year when the Ravens win the Super Bowl. But if it doesn't happen, you can come back to it. If the Ravens don't get to at least the AFC Championship game next season, my prediction is John Harbaugh gets fired. That's the cap. Because you cannot continue doing this same dance over and over again. And I think John Harbaugh is a good coach. I've been very clear for very long here on this show, if you've been listening to me every day, that I think John Harbaugh is a good coach, and there are 25 teams that would line up out the door to immediately bring in John if, the Ravens were to move on. But that doesn't mean that a fit is right at a certain time for a coach or for a player or for whatever it is. And what I mean by that is sometimes it's just time.
Sometimes it's just time. And look, I think that John Harbaugh is a great coach, but where do they go from here now? Like, what else is there to change? You've changed offensive coordinators. You've changed things on defense. You've changed the roster. You bring in Derrick Henry. You solidify the offensive line. They go get Zay Flowers and they draft talent. Like, what else is there to change?
I don't know that there is, and I don't know that there needs to be. Like at some point, there's just sort of luck, and only one team can get to the Super Bowl every year, and only two teams can get in the AFC Championship game every year. And like the Ravens have had a top 5 defense and top 10 defense and offense the last 2 years in a row. I wouldn't be eager to make any real changes. I'd say run it back, do it again, and hope that the ball bounces a little bit differently or it stays in Mark Andrews' hand. Like there's all these little factors along the way that if any one of those goes differently, maybe they're in the AFC Championship game, and that doesn't feel like it's a fireable offense.
And quite frankly, upgrading on John Harbaugh, we could talk about their failures in the playoffs, but John Harbaugh is a top 5 coach in the NFL. And I just don't see an upgrade available, as frustrating as it may be for Ravens fans. But moving forward to the game that was played before that, the Los Angeles Rams lose to the Philadelphia Eagles. I'll tell you, Lauren, I don't really have a lot to say here about the Rams. I think their window is just closed. They're a good football team. They got a good old gunslinger quarterback that can still come through in the clutch. But I don't know if adding talent anywhere on the roster for the Rams is going to be the difference. I just think Stafford's maybe a little too old at this point. And I don't think, it reminds me of, it's funny because I am wearing some Lakers gear. I'm a Lakers fan. This isn't intentional, but it reminds me of the Los Angeles Lakers right now, where LeBron James is still incredible and Anthony Davis is still incredible. But LeBron's just a little bit too old to really compete with the real superstars in the NBA nowadays. He's just a little too old to be that level. And I think that's where the Rams are at, where they're good enough to be competitive and you can feel the ghost of those great teams that, won the Super Bowl. But I just don't see the Rams as having any higher potential with their current form.
I'm really curious to see how Les Snead navigates this, right? Because he goes from being the GM who says F them picks, we're going all in. But then this year has maybe the best, I don't want to say best draft of anybody, but between Jared Verse and Brandon Fiskey and Cam Kitchens, the safety, they nailed some of their picks that all became really key contributors this year. So if they do this transition where they're still winning while also moving on from older players because they're just nailing all of their picks to replace these guys, if they get a rookie quarterback who turns out to be a great QB and they keep adding a receiver, they could kind of rebuild while still making the playoffs, and that would be a really interesting transition.
Well, if you're able to draft well, you can retool at any time. I think it's funny, though, that we're going to see the full life cycle. The Rams had such a good roster. They needed an elite quarterback to get them over the hump. Well, now they're going to build another elite roster, but Matthew Stafford is going to be that guy that they need to upgrade on to get over the hump because he just got older. It's just the life cycle is happening. But with that being said, the Detroit Lions, biggest upset of the weekend. And look, the Lions aren't going to get better. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action. That's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football, you want a chance to win real money while watching games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats, like total passing yards, rushing touchdowns, catches, for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money, and you can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. Over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded on Prize Picks. It's clear that people are loving Prize Picks. I've been playing for a while now. I'm having a blast. Looking at Josh Allen, more than 230 passing yards. Saquon Barkley, more than 1 touchdown this weekend. You can get paid out in as little as 15 minutes as well. So here's a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. It's Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, Lauren, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. We talked about the Ravens and the Rams bowing out of the NFL playoffs and where they go from here. But now I want to talk about this Detroit Lions team. And, you tell me, Lauren, if I'm being a little too hyperbolic, which, hey, look, guilty as charged. I have been hyperbolic before. It's something that I commonly do. So you tell me, but I'm looking at this Detroit Lions team, and I'm looking at the potential changes of the coaching staff, and I have doubts that we will see a better Detroit Lions team anytime in the future. But my guy, Matt Derry from Locked On Lions, he's not quite as skeptical.
And I don't want to hear about, well, Aaron Glenn's now not going to get a head coaching job because tonight was bad. Come on. Aaron Glenn deserves to be a head coach. Ben Johnson still deserves to be a head coach. Oh, by the way, the sky's not falling. Don't tell me that the Lions missed their opportunity and the window's closing and the season's over and the run is over and next year they'll be lucky to win 9 games. And no, this is a good football team with a ton of young talent. And by the way, didn't have their best defensive players tonight. And I know they've been battling through injuries. And I know that 2 weeks ago against Minnesota, they put on a defensive clinic against the Vikings. Problem was, that was Sam Darnold. Tonight, they faced Jayden Daniels.
So, listen, there's multiple reasons why I don't agree and agree with what Matt just said. Look, if Aaron Glenn and if Ben Johnson are head coach level coaches, how could you possibly argue that the Lions could be better next year without them? There is no way that Dan Campbell is going to hire 2 head coaching level talents. Even if they hire people who could eventually be head coaches, they will not be as good as Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn were this year as coaches, even if they could potentially be that good down the line. They will not be. It is impossible. And now everything about the Lions to that point, Lauren, had been a climb up. It had been hope. It had been, hey, we were underdogs. Hey, we lost, but we were underdogs. Hey, now we're the favorite. Hey, 15-2, everything positive, everything can be skewed. This is the first time that loss to the Commanders where you cannot say, oh, well, the Commanders have promised they can still get better. No, they made it to the top of the mountain and they took their first negative shot. And the worst way is the way that it happened. By elite quarterback play, and your quarterback, who everyone knew was an elite, turning into a pumpkin. So like the most devastating way that it could happen is how it happened, and then you lose 2 head level coach coordinators. This is the challenge for the non-schematic head coach. This is the challenge for the Mike Vrabel, the Mike Tomlin, the Dan Campbell. This is the challenge for them. Yeah, you're a leader of men. Yeah, you're a CEO. You have your team prepared. You steer the ship. But when you don't have the creative schematic guys behind you, how do you do? Because that was Mike Vrabel's undoing. And then you look at Dan Campbell now, who plays a very similar way. Mike Tomlin has not been able to replicate those things. And he's been consistently average for a long time. So am I crazy? But I think this is kind of the end of the Lions' window in a way. They're going to be good next year, but they will never be a better version of themselves than they were this year without those 2 coordinators.
Generally, I agree with you on that. I think it's really, really hard to replace those 2 coaches, but if Lions fans are looking for hope, I mean, you look at Philadelphia in 2022, Jonathan Gannon gets hired away, Shane Steichen gets hired away. How is Nick Sirianni going to replace those coordinators? Well, he did it very poorly the first year, but then Kellen Moore, Vic Fangio, they're back to 14 wins in an NFC championship game. So, it's not there's a good chance of a decline for sure, but it's not necessarily doomed if management there continues to add in young talent. They can stay healthier on defense. But kind of like we were talking about with the Rams, like eventually we get to the quarterback conversation of like, how much will that be a cap on their team, especially if the coordinator's not as good as Ben Johnson is at unlocking Jared Goff?
Yeah, exactly that. And how long until the Lions make their Trey Lance decision? It's going to happen eventually. And, I think, Lauren, you look at the Nick Sirianni example, maybe the Lions do take a little bit of a step back here. Like we saw with the Buffalo Bills when Brian Daboll left. They went to Ken Dorsey, and then they went to Joe Brady eventually, and now things are settled again. So it may take a year for the Lions to have a little bit of a down year, but maybe if they're, they make the playoffs, but they're a wild card instead of winning the division, something like that, maybe that's when they strike and go try to find their Josh Allen, their Patrick Mahomes. The 2026 class is expected by some to be a better quarterback class than this year with Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward. Will that be true? Will it not be true? We can't really know at this moment in time, but I'm just saying that could be a path forward where you kind of evaluate things next year, see if you need to make more changes, see if you found the right coordinators, and maybe that transition year allows you to take that chance on the guy to eventually replace Jared Goff. That would be an interesting domino effect for the Lions going forward.
Well, and because they're the kind of team like we were just talking about with the Rams, where it's like this sort of cycle between like building up around the quarterback and then trying to get the better quarterback. Like there is, as Matt Deary said, there's young talent at receiver, there's young talent across the defense.
Yes.
The offensive line is aging, but they've been slowly sort of building the the backups there with some developmental linemen there. Like they should be able to keep retooling, get healthier, and be a team that maybe Goff becomes the weak link. And if Goff's your weakest link, you can go pretty darn far. We've seen the Rams go to the Super Bowl with Goff as their weakest link. So yeah, I don't know that they're going to be this good again right away, but if I'm a Lions fan, I'm certainly not panicking. I just know that this was maybe as sweet as it was going to taste.
Well, the important thing I think is that the roster is good. You know, like you're saying, like the roster is good. So that's going to keep them being a good team. I think they do make the playoffs next year. I don't think it's any kind of dramatic, but is it going to be 15-2, leading the NFL in points scored? Maybe not quite that, maybe just a step back from that. But then once you're a step back from that and things get more realistic, then those questions about the quarterback definitely will pop in. I do want to look at the Houston Texans as well, who made it to the divisional round, won a playoff game, but I think all in all, it was a disappointing season based on how they played in the regular season, based on adding Danielle Hunter, Stephon Diggs, the way that the Houston Texans were being discussed in the preseason as a Super Bowl contender for what they ended up looking like. I don't think they lived up to the potential that people had for them. And I think the biggest reason for that is the offensive line. And my guy, Big Sarge from Locked On Texans, says that needs to be the focus.
Where do we go from here?
Where do we go?
You go directly to NRG Stadium, get on the elevator, you go up, you get off the elevator on a certain floor. I'm not going to say the floor. You get off on a certain floor because on that floor is where the executives are, right? Where the executives are, where the owners are, where the head coaches are. The head coach is. You pass up D'Amico's office. Hey, what's up, D'Amico? Blah, blah, blah. You keep going, right? You go down. You may see Kyle and Hannah McNair. Hey, how's it going? And then you make that left and you stop at Nick Casario's office. You walk in and you slam the door. You take the chair. You turn it around. You set it down in front of him and say, hey, my guy, this year during training camp, how about we not just be a glorified onlooker? How about we actually address the issues that you're watching every day, all day? How about the first place you start, interior offensive linemen?
I agree with that. These pocket passers, look, CJ Stroud has mobility to move around. The level of average mobility in the NFL has took leaps and bounds from 10 years ago, even of what just your average mobility looks like. CJ Stroud has average to plus mobility when he wants to, but for most part, he is the modern version of a pocket passer who wants to play and win in the pocket. And I think, like we saw with like a Drew Brees and even a Tom Brady, you have to fortify the interior of the offensive line so that those quarterbacks who step up so well in the pocket, so they have somewhere to go. So I think for the Texans, it's all offensive line. I think they have great talent pretty much everywhere else.
Yeah, you'd like to think that you can just kind of wave a magic wand and fix an interior offensive line, but they've tried to invest there, right? Shaq Mason, drafted Titus Howard, that's probably a few years ago now, and then this year was Blake Fisher on the right tackle.
Kenyon Green too. He was a high pick.
Juice Scruggs last year too, and then the interior. They've invested there. It just doesn't always produce results right away. We've seen this in Chicago and a bunch of other places where it's like invest in the O-line. Well, we're trying. It's like we're right. These positions. It's just if a bunch of really good offensive linemen were just out and available to pick up, everyone would go sign them and everyone would go draft them. It's not that simple.
Yeah, everybody says invest in the O-line. Well, if you know anything about investing, sometimes it doesn't pay off and you lose your money even though you invested. So you got to be careful. You don't need to just invest in the O-line. You need to hit on those picks. And I think you're 100% right, but I think a level of self-awareness from the Texans of, hey, these guys who we drafted, the investments that we made, maybe they're not going to give us the return that we hoped, and we don't have time with CJ's rookie contract to play around with this. So they need to go out and address it in a serious way. Probably means some veteran help and some help in the draft, some more competition. You need to attack this thing. And I think with the talent in the secondary and on the D-line and at wide receiver, Tank Dell hopefully comes back healthy with CJ Stroud, they have the talent on the roster to go full bore and try to help that offensive line.
Yeah, it kind of feels a little bit like what Matt Dury was saying with the Lions, where it's like, there's no need to panic here, right? The Texans are going to be fine. They too, they didn't have injuries to the Lions extent, but they had injuries, and it's normal for a second-year quarterback to run into some sophomore slump stuff and have to adjust better. And, young offensive coordinator and Bobby Slowick, had a lot of stuff figured out. He's got to adjust to, like, it's normal growing pains for a young team. And we can't expect the Texans to, like, right now be at their peak and now on their way down. Like, this team is still an ascending team. You're just trying to add a couple more things. You don't have to reinvent the wheel here.
Yeah, things don't happen overnight. I mean, we're talking about Lamar Jackson far into his career not being able to really get it done. So the Texans are in year 2 of the Stroud experience. I agree with you. It's not time to panic. It's time to build. But with that being said, you do wonder, Bobby Slowick, if they come out and disappoint next year, he might go from head coaching interviews to looking for a job. With that being said, that is going to do it for today's edition of Locked On NFL. Again, make sure you check out the afternoon edition with Tony Wiggins in the barber shop. But make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed. That's going to do it for us. I am your host, the Madman, Tyler Rowland, and my co-host, Lauren Cox. And as we tell you every single episode, stay safe out there.